When Captain Helena Voss ordered Sergeant First Class Maya Rivera to report to her office at Fort Blackstone at precisely 0700 hours, Maya knew her meticulously crafted facade was about to face its greatest test. What she didn't anticipate was for Captain Voss to seize a pair of regulation field shears and brutally hack away her shoulder-length black hair as punishment for what she called chronic insubordination and failure to respect command authority. But as those severed strands scattered across the polished concrete floor of the disciplinary office, neither woman realized that this single act of vindictive cruelty would expose a classified marking so explosive it would trigger a complete lockdown of Fort Blackstone's most sensitive operations within 6 hours. Before we dive deeper into this shocking revelation, let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. And if this story grips you the way it gripped everyone at Fort Blackstone that day, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have an even more incredible story that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about military secrets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning frost clung to the razor wire surrounding Fort Blackstone like crystallized betrayal, each frozen droplet reflecting the harsh LED security lights that never truly went dark. This sprawling military installation, carved from 45,000 acres of unforgiving Montana wilderness, served as home to the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion, one of the Army's most secretive units specializing in signals intelligence and cryptographic warfare. Massive satellite dishes pointed toward the heavens like metal flowers seeking digital sunshine, while underground bunkers housed computing power that could crack enemy communications or disappear entire digital footprints with surgical precision. Sergeant First Class Maya Rivera walked across the main courtyard with the measured cadence of someone who had learned to make herself unremarkable through careful practice. At 31, she possessed the kind of forgettable competence that military bureaucracies valued but rarely remembered. Average height at 5'6", athletic but not exceptionally so. Her black hair typically pulled into the regulation bun that revealed nothing of the precision with which she arranged each strand every morning. Her Army combat uniform bore the digital camouflage pattern that was supposed to help soldiers blend into any environment, though Maya had perfected the art of blending in long before she ever wore a uniform. The most striking thing about her appearance, or rather the most deliberately unremarkable thing, was the complete absence of the specialized badges, unit patches, and skill identifiers that normally decorated a soldier's uniform like a roadmap of their military journey. Where other members of the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion displayed their cyber warfare badges, their cryptographic specialist insignia, their accumulated ribbons documenting deployments to digital battlefields most civilians never knew existed, Maya's uniform remained sterile and anonymous. To casual observers, she might have been a cook, a clerk, or perhaps a motor pool mechanic whose only job was keeping vehicles running and paperwork filed. This anonymity was not accidental. It was carefully cultivated, absolutely essential, and had kept her alive through 28 months of the most dangerous assignment of her career. She moved through Fort Blackstone like a ghost in digital camouflage, present but unnoticed, familiar enough that guards waved her through security checkpoints without really seeing her, forgettable enough that fellow soldiers could work beside her for weeks without remembering her name or her face. The intelligence analysts in the sensitive compartmented information facility knew her as the reliable technician who maintained their computer systems with quiet efficiency. The signals intercept specialists recognized her as someone who could troubleshoot their equipment when it malfunctioned, but couldn't tell you what shift she worked or where she lived. Even the mess hall staff served her meals with professional courtesy, while their eyes slid past her, as if she were part of the institutional furniture. This morning was different, though. This morning, Maya had been summoned by name through official channels, her carefully maintained invisibility shattered by a formal written order delivered by a stone-faced military police sergeant who had looked at her with the particular intensity reserved for soldiers who had attracted the wrong kind of attention from the wrong kind of people. Captain Helena Voss was exactly that kind of people. At 42, she embodied everything the modern Army claimed to value: unwavering discipline, absolute adherence to regulations, and the kind of leadership style that confused fear with respect. Her office in the battalion headquarters building served as a monument to military orthodoxy, its walls lined with photographs documenting a career built on finding fault with subordinates and correcting deficiencies through increasingly creative applications of administrative punishment. Voss had built her reputation on bringing order to chaos, on taking problematic soldiers and either molding them into perfect compliance or removing them from the equation entirely. Her methods were old school but effective. Direct confrontation, immediate consequences, and the kind of public correction that left no doubt about who controlled every aspect of a soldier's existence. She particularly despised what she called special snowflakes, personnel who seemed to believe their technical expertise or specialized training exempted them from basic military courtesy. Maya Rivera represented everything Captain Voss found problematic about the modern army. For 28 months, Maya had operated at Fort Blackstone with a level of independence that bordered on insubordination. She came and went at irregular hours, worked on projects that weren't clearly defined in any official documentation, and demonstrated technical capabilities that seemed far beyond what her official position should require. Worse, when questioned about her activities, she provided responses that were technically accurate but somehow managed to make Voss feel like she was being lectured by someone who considered her questions beneath notice. The incident that had finally triggered this morning's disciplinary session had occurred during Voss's weekly inspection of the intelligence facilities. Maya had been working alone in a restricted computer lab, her fingers dancing across multiple keyboards while streams of encrypted data flowed across monitors that displayed classification levels Voss didn't recognize. When confronted about her presence in a facility that required special authorization, Maya had provided a textbook explanation of routine maintenance procedures, complete with technical details that demonstrated intimate knowledge of systems that most soldiers weren't even allowed to acknowledge existed. Her explanation had been perfect, professional, and completely infuriating. To Voss's ear, Maya had spoken with the confidence of someone who understood classified systems better than the officers supposedly in charge of them. It was the kind of quiet competence that suggested Maya knew exactly how much she could reveal without crossing security boundaries, and how to make her questioners feel inadequate for asking questions they weren't qualified to understand the answers to. As Maya approached the headquarters building where Captain Voss waited with whatever punishment she had devised, she carried with her a secret that would have stunned everyone at Fort Blackstone. Hidden beneath her regulation uniform, concealed by careful arrangement of clothing and hair, was a marking that represented one of the military's most closely guarded secrets. A classified tattoo that identified her as something far more dangerous than anyone on the base could imagine. In less than 30 minutes, Captain Voss's attempt to demonstrate authority through petty cruelty would expose that marking to daylight for the first time in 28 months. And once that happened, the carefully constructed world of Fort Blackstone would never be the same again. Fort Blackstone stretched across the Montana landscape like a digital fortress carved from wilderness and paranoia. Established in 1943 as a conventional Army training facility, it had evolved over 8 decades into something far more complex and secretive. The original barracks and parade grounds still existed, providing cover for casual observers and satellite surveillance, but the real heart of the installation lay 30 feet underground in a network of reinforced bunkers that didn't appear on any publicly available maps. The surface facilities maintained the illusion of a standard military base. Soldiers conducted morning physical training on the central parade field, their synchronized movements visible to anyone with sufficient clearance to approach the perimeter fencing. The motor pool displayed rows of standard military vehicles, Humvees, cargo trucks, and maintenance equipment that suggested this was simply another logistics hub in the Army's vast network of supply and support installations. Even the dining facility, post-exchange, and family housing areas contributed to the carefully maintained facade of routine military operations. But beneath this conventional exterior, Fort Blackstone housed some of the most advanced intelligence gathering and cyber warfare capabilities in the entire Department of Defense. The underground facilities, accessed through innocuous-looking maintenance buildings and disguised elevator shafts, contained computing power that rivaled the National Security Agency's most sophisticated installations. Server farms hummed with the electronic heartbeat of operations that could monitor satellite communications across 3 continents, crack diplomatic encryption in real time, and insert carefully crafted disinformation into enemy networks without leaving detectable traces. The 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion operated under cover identities that even most personnel at Fort Blackstone believed were genuine. Officially, they provided technical support for routine military communications. Unofficially, they were responsible for some of the most sensitive signals intelligence operations in the United States military. Their mission parameters were classified at levels so high that acknowledging their existence required authorization from the Secretary of Defense, and their operational successes were recorded in files that would remain sealed for 50 years after the last person with knowledge of them had died. The personnel assigned to Fort Blackstone represented a unique intersection of technical brilliance and security reliability. Each member of the 23rd had undergone psychological evaluation, polygraph examination, and background investigation so thorough that investigators knew more about their financial history, personal relationships, and behavioral patterns than most people knew about themselves. They were mathematicians who had been recruited from prestigious universities, computer scientists whose doctoral dissertations had been immediately classified, and linguists whose ability to decode foreign communications had earned them legendary status in intelligence circles. These soldiers lived double lives by necessity. To their families and friends outside the military, they were generic Army personnel assigned to a boring logistics base in rural Montana. They couldn't discuss their work, their colleagues, or even the specific location of their duty station beyond acknowledging that they were stationed somewhere in the northwestern United States. Their social media profiles, carefully monitored and occasionally edited by security personnel, showed generic military life photos that revealed nothing about their true capabilities or mission. Within the classified areas of Fort Blackstone, these same soldiers operated sophisticated equipment that could intercept cellular phone conversations in Beijing, monitor satellite internet traffic from Moscow, and track the digital footprints of terrorist organizations operating in countries whose names couldn't be mentioned in official reports. They worked 12-hour shifts in windowless rooms, their eyes constantly focused on screens that displayed intelligence so sensitive that even looking at it required specific authorization for each individual piece of information. The base's security protocols reflected the extraordinary value of what was being protected. Triple-fence perimeter with motion sensors, thermal imaging, and automated response systems that could identify and track individual personnel from distances exceeding 2 miles. Guard towers manned by soldiers whose backgrounds had been investigated by 3 separate intelligence agencies. Electronic countermeasures that could detect and neutralize surveillance devices so sophisticated that most foreign intelligence services didn't know they existed. Access to different areas of Fort Blackstone required increasingly specialized credentials. The surface facilities could be entered by anyone with standard military identification and appropriate clearance levels. The underground areas required biometric authentication, compartmented security badges, and escort by personnel with specific authorization. The most sensitive areas, buried deepest beneath the Montana bedrock, could only be accessed by individuals whose identities were verified through retinal scans, voice recognition, and genetic markers that were checked against a database so classified that it was stored on computers physically disconnected from any external network. Within this environment of layered security and compartmented secrets, the daily routine maintained an almost surreal sense of normalcy. Soldiers attended mandatory training sessions on topics like vehicle maintenance and basic rifle marksmanship, maintaining skills they would never use while hiding expertise that could influence the outcome of international conflicts. They participated in unit physical fitness competitions, building team cohesion among people who couldn't discuss what they actually did for a living. They even conducted occasional exercises with conventional Army units, playing the role of support personnel while carefully concealing capabilities that would have astounded their visitors. The mess hall served standard military food prepared by cooks who had been cleared for access to classified installations but who had no idea what kind of work was being conducted 20 feet beneath the kitchen where they prepared 3 meals a day for soldiers whose true identities were hidden even from each other. The base library maintained a collection of technical manuals and professional development materials that appeared routine, but were actually carefully selected to support cover identities, while providing access to information that supported ongoing intelligence operations. Even the base chapel, staffed by a chaplain whose seminary education had been supplemented with training in counseling personnel who carried classified information, served as both genuine spiritual support and security monitoring. Soldiers could seek religious guidance and emotional support while chaplains watched for signs of psychological stress that might compromise operational security or indicate potential security risks. This was the world that Sergeant First Class Maya Rivera had navigated for 28 months, moving through layers of deception and compartmented reality with the skill of someone who understood exactly how much truth could be revealed in each setting. She had become expert at maintaining multiple levels of identity simultaneously, appearing as a routine technician to casual observers while demonstrating just enough competence to avoid questions about why someone with her obvious capabilities was assigned to such apparently mundane duties. But today, as she approached the headquarters building where Captain Helena Voss waited with whatever punishment she had devised, Maya carried with her knowledge that went beyond even the extraordinary secrets that defined daily life at Fort Blackstone. She possessed information so sensitive that its existence was known to fewer than 12 people in the entire intelligence community. And her true mission at Fort Blackstone involved stakes that could fundamentally alter the balance of global military power. The morning sun painted the mountains surrounding Fort Blackstone in shades of gold and shadow, beautiful and deceptive like everything else about this installation where the most dangerous secrets in American military history were hidden beneath a facade of routine Army logistics operations. In a few minutes, Captain Voss's attempt to assert dominance through petty disciplinary action would crack that facade in ways that no one could predict or control. Sergeant First Class Maya Rivera approached the headquarters building of the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion with the controlled stride of someone who had spent 28 months perfecting the art of appearing unremarkable while carrying secrets that could topple governments. Her boots echoed against the polished concrete walkway with metronomic precision, each step calculated to convey neither urgency nor reluctance, the measured pace of a competent soldier responding to legitimate orders from superior authority. The headquarters building itself was a masterpiece of deliberate architectural blandness. 3 stories of gray concrete and tinted glass that could have housed any bureaucratic function from supply management to personnel administration. The only hints of its true significance were subtle. Windows that reflected electromagnetic radiation, doors reinforced beyond normal security requirements, and ventilation systems designed to prevent electronic eavesdropping. To casual observation, it appeared to be exactly what Fort Blackstone's cover identity suggested, the administrative hub of a routine logistics installation. Maya paused at the main entrance, where Staff Sergeant David Chin manned the security checkpoint with the bored efficiency of someone who had processed thousands of routine visits. Chun had been at Fort Blackstone for 14 months, long enough to recognize most faces but not long enough to have developed the kind of institutional memory that might ask uncomfortable questions about personnel whose duties seemed unusually flexible. "Morning, Rivera," he said, barely looking up from his security monitor as he scanned her identification card through the electronic reader. "Captain Voss is expecting you. 3rd floor, room 347. You know the drill." Maya nodded acknowledgement and proceeded through the metal detector, which registered nothing unusual about her person. The classified marking hidden beneath her uniform was undetectable to conventional security screening, designed specifically to avoid triggering any electronic surveillance or casual physical inspection. It was a secret that required deliberate revelation, protected by both its location and the psychological conditioning that made its bearer unconsciously arrange clothing and positioning to keep it concealed. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor passed in silence, broken only by the mechanical whir of motors and the soft ping of floor indicators. Maya used these moments to reinforce the psychological barriers that had enabled her to function at Fort Blackstone without compromising her true mission. She was Sergeant First Class Maya Rivera, communications specialist, assigned to routine network maintenance and user support. Her service record was exemplary but unremarkable. Her technical capabilities were adequate for her assigned duties, but nothing that would draw special attention from supervisors or security personnel. This identity had been constructed with the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized every aspect of her actual mission. The Defense Intelligence Agency's Identity Construction Division had spent 6 months creating Maya Rivera from carefully selected fragments of real biographical data, educational records that could withstand investigation, and military service history that explained her presence at Fort Blackstone without raising questions about specialized training or unusual qualifications. The woman walking down the 3rd floor corridor toward Captain Voss's office was the result of psychological conditioning so sophisticated that it operated at subconscious levels. Maya Rivera existed as a complete personality, with preferences, habits, and behavioral patterns that felt authentic because they had been integrated into her neural pathways through techniques that intelligence agencies rarely acknowledged existed. She could pass polygraph examination as Maya Rivera, respond to psychological evaluation as Maya Rivera, and maintain social relationships as Maya Rivera without conscious effort or psychological strain. But beneath this carefully constructed identity lay the truth that had brought her to Fort Blackstone on a mission so classified that acknowledging its existence required authorization from the National Security Council. The woman approaching Captain Voss's office was actually Major Helena Voss, United States Army Special Operations Command, assigned to the Defense Intelligence Agency's most sensitive counterintelligence unit. Her real mission at Fort Blackstone involved capabilities and objectives that went far beyond routine penetration testing or security assessment. Major Vasquez belonged to a program so classified that it existed in bureaucratic spaces between official organizational charts. Project Lazarus represented the intelligence community's response to the discovery that foreign adversaries had developed the capability to insert deep cover operatives into the most sensitive installations of the United States military. These weren't conventional spies gathering information for eventual transmission to enemy handlers. They were trained saboteurs positioned to disable critical systems during times of international crisis, sleeper agents whose activation could cripple American military capabilities at moments when national survival depended on those capabilities functioning flawlessly. Project Lazarus had been created to hunt these embedded threats using techniques that conventional counterintelligence couldn't detect. Its operatives underwent training that combined advanced psychological conditioning with technical expertise that enabled them to identify enemy agents who might have spent years or even decades establishing their false identities. They learned to think like deep cover operatives, to recognize the subtle behavioral patterns that distinguished authentic military personnel from sophisticated impersonators, and to operate within American military installations while maintaining identities so convincing that they could fool polygraph examinations and behavioral analysis. Helena Voss had spent 3 years training for assignment to Project Lazarus before being inserted at Fort Blackstone with the mission of identifying suspected enemy operatives within the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion. Intelligence analysts had detected patterns in classified information leakage that suggested the presence of at least one highly placed foreign asset with access to signals intelligence operations. Conventional security investigations had failed to identify the source of these leaks, largely because the suspected operative had probably spent years establishing an identity so authentic that it passed all standard counterintelligence screening. Helena's mission was to identify this embedded threat through patient observation and analysis, using her position as an unremarkable communications technician to study the behavioral patterns of personnel with access to the leaked information. For 28 months, she had maintained her Maya Rivera identity while conducting what amounted to a counterintelligence investigation disguised as routine technical support duties. The classified marking hidden beneath her uniform was both identification and insurance policy. Applied using techniques that made it invisible to casual observation but unmistakable to personnel trained in Project Lazarus protocols, it served as authentication that could identify her as a legitimate counterintelligence operative to anyone with appropriate security clearances. The marking's location and design were known only to the 12 people worldwide with oversight responsibility for Project Lazarus operations, making it impossible for enemy agents to replicate even if they somehow learned of its existence. More importantly, the marking contained encoded information that could expose the scope and sensitivity of Helena's mission if examined by personnel with appropriate technical equipment and security clearances. It was designed to serve as a final failsafe, a way to prove her legitimate status if her cover identity was compromised and she faced accusations of being an enemy operative herself. The information encoded within the marking included authentication codes that could be verified through channels so secure that accessing them would trigger immediate notification to the highest levels of the intelligence community. As Helena approached Captain Voss's office, she was acutely aware that the next few minutes would test every aspect of her conditioning and preparation. Voss represented exactly the type of conventional military authority that posed the greatest threat to deep cover operations, someone whose understanding of military hierarchy was based on visible rank and obvious compliance rather than the subtle realities of modern intelligence work. Helena had spent 28 months carefully managing her interactions with Voss, providing just enough competence to avoid negative attention while maintaining the facade of being a routine technician whose capabilities matched her apparent position. But Voss's growing suspicion suggested that this careful balance was becoming unsustainable. The door to room 347 stood partially open, revealing Captain Voss seated behind a metal desk that had been arranged to maximize the psychological impact of the coming confrontation. Helena paused at the threshold, using these final moments to reinforce the mental barriers that would allow her to endure whatever punishment Voss had devised while protecting the classified information that had taken 3 years to position at Fort Blackstone. In a few minutes, she would discover that some secrets were too dangerous to remain hidden, and that Voss's attempt to assert authority through petty cruelty would expose truths that neither of them was prepared to handle. Helena knocked twice on the door frame of room 347 before stepping across the threshold into Captain Helena Voss's domain. The office had been arranged with military precision to reinforce authority and intimidate subordinates. Voss sat behind a government-issue metal desk positioned to force visitors to stand in uncomfortable proximity while being evaluated from a position of elevated psychological advantage. The walls displayed the standard collection of military photographs, certificates, and awards that documented a career built on rigid adherence to regulations and successful management of personnel who might otherwise challenge established order. "Sergeant Rivera reporting as ordered, ma'am," Helena announced, assuming the position of attention with textbook precision. Her voice carried the neutral tone of professional military courtesy that revealed nothing of the complex calculations running through her mind as she assessed the tactical situation developing in this small administrative space. Captain Voss studied her with the deliberate intensity of a predator evaluating prey. At 42, Voss had developed the kind of cold analytical gaze that made subordinates immediately conscious of every potential flaw in their appearance, bearing, and attitude. She remained seated for long enough to establish psychological dominance before rising and moving around the desk to stand directly in front of Helena, close enough that the height differential between them became uncomfortably apparent. "At ease, Sergeant," Voss commanded, though her tone suggested that relaxation was neither expected nor desired. "Do you know why you're here?" Helena shifted to the parade rest position, hands clasped behind her back, feet separated at shoulder width, eyes focused on a point approximately 6 inches above Voss's head. The question was clearly rhetorical, designed to begin a process of psychological pressure that would culminate in whatever punishment Voss had determined was appropriate for Helena's perceived infractions. "No, ma'am," Helena replied, though she had spent considerable time analyzing the possible triggers that might have prompted this disciplinary session. Her recent activities at Fort Blackstone had included routine maintenance of classified computer systems, troubleshooting communication equipment in sensitive areas, and providing technical support that required access to facilities where most personnel weren't authorized to operate. Any of these activities could have attracted Voss's attention if observed by someone who didn't understand the legitimate reasons for Helena's presence in restricted areas. Voss began pacing in front of Helena with predatory deliberation, her boots clicking against the polished linoleum floor in a rhythm calculated to increase psychological tension. "For 28 months, Sergeant Rivera, you've been assigned to my battalion. 28 months during which you've demonstrated technical competence that seems remarkably advanced for someone with your official qualifications." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Helena maintained her position of parade rest while internally analyzing the implications of Voss's statement. If Voss had been conducting surveillance of Helena's activities, she might have observed behavior patterns that seemed inconsistent with the cover identity that Helena had spent years perfecting. Worse, Voss might have access to information that revealed discrepancies between Helena's apparent capabilities and her official training record. 28 months, Voss continued, during which you've had access to classified systems that most soldiers with twice your experience aren't authorized to approach. 28 months during which you've provided technical explanations for complex problems that suggest knowledge far beyond what routine military training should provide. Helena's conditioning had prepared her for exactly this type of confrontation, but the specificity of Voss's observations suggested a level of scrutiny that went beyond casual supervisory attention. Someone had been watching her activities closely enough to notice the subtle inconsistencies that inevitably developed when a deep-cover operative tried to maintain a facade of limited competence while performing duties that required advanced technical expertise. "Ma'am," Helena said carefully, "I've always performed my assigned duties according to established protocols and technical manuals. If my performance has seemed unusual, it may be because I take professional development seriously and study technical documentation during off-duty hours." It was a carefully crafted response that acknowledged Voss's observations while providing a plausible explanation for apparent discrepancies. Elena had learned during Project Lazarus training that the most effective cover stories contained elements of verifiable truth that could withstand investigation while concealing the actual sources of suspicious knowledge or capabilities. Voss stopped pacing and faced Elena directly, her expression showing the satisfaction of someone who believed she had identified a problem that required immediate correction. Professional development, she repeated with evident skepticism. That's an interesting explanation for someone who seems to understand classified encryption protocols better than officers with graduate degrees in computer science. The accusation was more specific than Elena had expected, suggesting that Voss had been conducting systematic observation of Elena's work, rather than simply noting general patterns of unusual competence. If Voss had access to detailed records of Elena's technical activities, she might have identified specific instances where Elena had demonstrated knowledge that couldn't be explained by her official training background. 3 days ago, Voss continued, I conducted an unannounced inspection of the sensitive compartmented information facility. I found you working alone in a restricted computer lab, accessing systems that require specialized clearances and technical knowledge that isn't covered in any training program available to personnel at your grade level. Elena felt a chill of recognition as she realized that Voss was referring to the incident that had prompted this disciplinary session. 3 days earlier, Elena had been conducting routine maintenance on the quantum encryption systems that protected Fort Blackstone's most sensitive communications. The work required intimate knowledge of cryptographic protocols that were classified beyond the level accessible to most personnel at the installation, but it was necessary to maintain the security of systems that Elena's real mission required her to monitor. When I asked you to explain your presence in that facility, Voss said, her voice carrying the dangerous quiet that experienced soldiers learn to recognize as a warning of impending administrative storm. You provided a technical explanation that demonstrated familiarity with classified systems that someone with your background shouldn't know exist. The trap was becoming apparent. Voss had identified the fundamental problem that plagued all deep cover operations within military installations: the impossibility of maintaining technical competence sufficient to perform necessary duties while appearing to possess only the knowledge appropriate to an assumed identity. Elena's mission at Fort Blackstone required her to access systems and demonstrate capabilities that inevitably revealed training and experience inconsistent with her cover as a routine communications specialist. Ma'am, Elena began, but Voss interrupted with a gesture that made clear the time for explanations had passed. What makes this particularly interesting, Sergeant Rivera, is that your personnel file contains some unusual gaps. Your technical training record shows completion of standard military courses, but somehow you've developed expertise in areas that aren't covered by any program available to enlisted personnel. Your security clearance paperwork includes classifications that don't match your official job description. And most intriguingly, your assignment history shows gaps that aren't explained by any documentation in your official record. Elena's mind raced through the implications of Voss's investigation. If Voss had access to Elena's complete personnel file, she might have identified discrepancies that revealed the artificial construction of the Maya Rivera identity. Worse, Voss might have initiated inquiries that could expose the existence of Project Lazarus if pursued through official channels. I've spent considerable time reviewing your case, Sergeant Rivera, Voss said, moving closer until she stood within arm's reach of Elena's position. And I've concluded that you represent exactly the kind of problem that undermines military discipline and operational security. You're someone who believes that technical expertise exempts you from normal accountability to military authority. The psychological pressure was building according to a pattern that Elena recognized from her training in resistance to interrogation and coercive interviewing. Voss was constructing a narrative that would justify whatever punishment she intended to inflict, using Elena's apparent inconsistencies as evidence of character defects that required correction through administrative action. Today, Sergeant Rivera, you're going to learn that competence without accountability is worthless. You're going to discover that military bearing and respect for authority matter more than any technical knowledge you think makes you special. Voss moved to a cabinet beside her desk and withdrew a pair of field shears, the heavy-duty scissors used for emergency situations where precision was less important than functionality. The metal gleamed under the fluorescent lighting as Voss tested the sharpness of the blades with practiced efficiency. Military grooming standards, Voss announced, exist for reasons that go beyond personal appearance. They represent submission to institutional authority, acknowledgement that individual preferences are subordinate to collective discipline. Helena realized with growing alarm that Voss intended to use the scissors to cut her hair as punishment for perceived insubordination. The disciplinary action would be humiliating and degrading, but more critically, it would expose the classified marking that Helena had kept concealed for 28 months through careful arrangement of clothing and hairstyle. "Turn around, Sergeant Rivera," Voss commanded. "Face the window. We're going to address some deficiencies in your understanding of what military discipline actually means." As Helena complied with the order, she understood that the next few minutes would determine whether 28 months of careful preparation would culminate in mission success or catastrophic compromise. The marking hidden beneath her hair contained information that would either authenticate her legitimate status or trigger a security crisis that could expose Project Lazarus to enemy surveillance. The sound of scissors opening behind her seemed to echo through the small office like the mechanical preparation for an execution that neither woman fully understood they were about to witness. Helena felt the cool Montana air from the window against her face as she assumed the position Captain Voss had commanded. Her hands clasped behind her back in perfect parade rest while her mind conducted rapid threat assessment calculations that had nothing to do with military discipline and everything to do with operational security protocols that could determine the fate of national intelligence operations. The classified marking that Captain Voss was about to expose had been applied using techniques developed in laboratories that officially didn't exist, by technicians whose names appeared in no government database, using compounds that combined advanced nanotechnology with biological integration methods that pushed the boundaries of what the human body could accept without rejection. The marking itself was invisible under normal circumstances, appearing as nothing more than a slight discoloration of skin that could be explained by any number of mundane causes: a childhood scar, an allergic reaction, or simple genetic variation in pigmentation. But when exposed to specific wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation, or when subjected to chemical analysis using equipment available in any modern forensics laboratory, the marking revealed encoded information that would immediately identify Helena as a Project Lazarus operative conducting classified counterintelligence operations. More critically, the marking contained authentication codes that could be verified through communication channels so secure that accessing them would trigger automatic notification to the National Security Council and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The marking had been positioned with surgical precision at the base of Helena's skull, concealed beneath her hairline where it would remain invisible unless her hair was cut shorter than military regulations normally permitted. The location had been chosen specifically to ensure that the marking would never be accidentally exposed during routine medical examinations, physical training activities, or the casual physical contact that characterized normal military social interaction. For 28 months, Helena had maintained her hair at precisely the length necessary to conceal the marking while remaining within acceptable military grooming standards. She had developed unconscious habits of positioning and movement that ensured the marking remained hidden even during activities like swimming, showering, or sleeping in shared quarters. The psychological conditioning that supported her Maya Rivera identity included subconscious behavioral modifications that made protecting the marking's concealment as automatic as breathing. Project Lazarus operatives received extensive training in contingency protocols for situations where cover identities might be compromised through accidental exposure of classified markings. The standard procedure involved immediate extraction from the operational area, debriefing by specialized personnel, and reassignment to duties that didn't require deep cover infiltration. But Helena's mission at Fort Blackstone had reached a critical phase where extraction would compromise 28 months of intelligence gathering and potentially allow enemy operatives to escape detection indefinitely. Helena had identified 3 personnel within the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion whose behavioral patterns suggested possible enemy infiltration. Technical Sergeant Marcus Webb demonstrated technical capabilities that exceeded his official training background and had access to communication systems that could facilitate transmission of classified information to foreign handlers. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Park showed unusual interest in operations outside her assigned duties and had been observed in restricted areas during off-duty hours without plausible explanation. Most significantly, Master Sergeant Robert Chun had family connections to individuals with known ties to foreign intelligence services and had demonstrated knowledge of classified operations that wasn't documented in his security clearance paperwork. Helena's investigation had progressed to the point where she needed additional time to gather evidence that would definitively prove or disprove enemy infiltration by these suspects. Premature extraction would leave the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion potentially compromised by enemy operatives whose missions might involve sabotage of critical intelligence systems during times of international crisis. The stakes involved in Helena's mission went far beyond individual career consequences or even institutional embarrassment. They involved the fundamental security of American military intelligence capabilities. As Captain Voss approached with the field shears, Helena realized that she faced a decision that would determine not only her own fate, but potentially the success or failure of one of the most sensitive counterintelligence operations in recent military history. She could attempt to prevent the hair cutting through physical resistance, which would certainly trigger disciplinary action that might include detention and medical examination that could expose the marking under controlled circumstances. Alternatively, she could allow Voss to proceed with the punishment, knowing that exposure of the marking would trigger security protocols that might compromise her mission, but would also authenticate her legitimate status as a counterintelligence operative. The sound of scissors cutting through hair filled the small office with mechanical precision as Voss began removing sections of Helena's carefully maintained concealment. Each severed strand represented months of preparation and psychological conditioning designed to maintain the delicate balance between operational effectiveness and security protection. Helena felt the cool air against newly exposed skin as Voss worked with deliberate thoroughness, cutting far more hair than military grooming standards would ever require. "You know, Sergeant Rivera," Voss said as she continued cutting, "I've been studying your case for months. Your technical capabilities, your access to classified systems, your unusual knowledge of procedures that aren't covered in any training program available to someone with your background." Helena remained motionless as the cutting continued, but internally she was analyzing the implications of Voss's statement. If Voss had been conducting systematic surveillance of Helena's activities for months, she might have collected evidence that could expose not only Helena's true identity, but potentially the entire structure of Project Lazarus operations at Fort Blackstone. "What I find most interesting," Voss continued, moving to attack a section of hair closer to Helena's neck, "is that your personnel file contains some very sophisticated inconsistencies. The kind of inconsistencies that suggest professional document construction rather than simple administrative errors." The scissors bit deeper, cutting closer to Helena's scalp than necessary, and Helena felt the first touch of metal against the skin at the base of her neck. In moments, the classified marking would be exposed to daylight for the first time since its application in a secure facility 3 years earlier. "For example," Voss said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone revealing carefully gathered evidence, "your security clearance paperwork includes authentication codes that don't appear in any standard military database. Your training records show completion of courses that aren't offered at the institutions listed in your file. And most intriguingly, your assignment history includes gaps that coincide with periods when the Defense Intelligence Agency was conducting classified operations that haven't been publicly acknowledged." Helena's heart rate increased as she realized that Voss's investigation had progressed far beyond casual suspicion. If Voss had access to information about Defense Intelligence Agency operations, she might have stumbled onto intelligence that could compromise multiple ongoing counterintelligence missions beyond just Helena's assignment at Fort Blackstone. The scissors continued their work, each cut bringing them closer to the moment when 28 months of careful concealment would be irreversibly shattered. Helena found herself calculating the precise timing of when the marking would become visible, the sequence of events that would unfold once Voss discovered what she had exposed, and the security protocols that would automatically activate once authenticated personnel confirmed Helena's true identity. "Almost finished," Voss announced with evident satisfaction. "Just need to clean up these last few sections here, and then we'll see exactly what kind of person you really are when you're not hiding behind technical expertise and mysterious qualifications." The final cut severed the last strands of hair that had concealed Helena's greatest secret for over 2 years. As the auburn locks fell to the office floor, the classified marking at the base of Helena's skull was exposed to artificial light for the first time since its application, revealing encoded information that would trigger the most significant security response in Fort Blackstone's operational history. Helena felt the cool air against her exposed neck and realized that the careful balance she had maintained for 28 months was about to collapse in ways that neither she nor Captain Voss could fully anticipate or control. Helena felt Captain Voss's fingers brush against the newly exposed skin at the base of her neck as the final strands of severed hair fell away, and in that moment of contact, Both women experienced a shock of recognition that would fundamentally alter everything they thought they understood about military authority, classified operations, and the deadly serious games being played beneath the surface of routine army logistics. The marking that Helena had concealed for 28 months appeared as an intricate pattern of lines and symbols that seemed to shimmer slightly under the fluorescent lighting of Voss's office. At first glance, it resembled nothing more than an elaborate tattoo, the kind of artistic body modification that military regulations specifically prohibited but that some soldiers acquired during off-duty hours and concealed beneath regulation uniforms. But closer examination revealed geometric precision that suggested technological rather than artistic origins, with details so fine that they challenged the limits of what conventional tattooing equipment could achieve. "What the hell is that?" Voss whispered, her voice carrying a combination of fascination and alarm as she leaned closer to examine the exposed marking. Her fingers traced the air just above Helena's skin, not quite touching but clearly studying the intricate pattern that had been hidden beneath carefully arranged hair for over 2 years. Helena remained in position, hands clasped behind her back, but her entire body tensed as she realized that the moment of critical decision had arrived. The marking was now visible to someone without appropriate security clearances, triggering automatic protocols that would either authenticate her legitimate status or initiate security procedures that could expose Project Lazarus to hostile surveillance. Every aspect of her training in deep cover operations had prepared her for this possibility, but experiencing the actual moment of exposure created psychological stress that challenged even the most sophisticated conditioning techniques. "Sergeant Rivera," Voss said, her voice now carrying a note of authority mixed with uncertainty. "I asked you a question. What is that marking on your neck?" Helena calculated her options with the speed and precision that 3 years of specialized training had made automatic. She could maintain her Maya Rivera identity and claim ignorance about the marking, suggesting that it was some kind of medical condition or artistic modification that she had forgotten about or chosen not to disclose. This approach would preserve her cover identity but would require convincing explanations for geometric precision that obviously represented technological rather than natural or artistic origins. Alternatively, she could begin the process of revealing her true identity and mission, accepting that 28 months of careful infiltration were about to end but ensuring that the security protocols designed to protect Project Lazarus operatives would be properly activated. This approach carried significant risks, including the possibility that Voss lacked the security clearances necessary to receive classified information about counterintelligence operations. "Ma'am," Helena said carefully, "I'm not certain what you're referring to. If there's something unusual about my appearance, perhaps it should be examined by medical personnel who can provide appropriate assessment." It was a strategically ambiguous response that acknowledged Voss's observation while avoiding direct confirmation or denial of the marking's significance. Helena's training had emphasized the importance of controlling information flow during moments of potential exposure, ensuring that classified details were revealed only to personnel with demonstrated need-to-know authorization and appropriate security clearances. Voss moved around to face Helena directly, her expression showing the kind of intense focus that military officers developed when confronting situations that fell outside normal operational parameters. "Sergeant Rivera, I want you to look at me and explain exactly what kind of marking you have on your neck. And I want you to explain why someone with your background would have what appears to be some kind of coded symbol permanently applied to their skin." Helena met Voss's gaze with the steady composure that had enabled her to maintain her cover identity through 28 months of careful deception. "Ma'am, if you believe there's something unusual about my appearance that has security implications, I recommend that you contact the appropriate authorities for guidance on proper procedures." The response was precisely what Helena's training had taught her to say when faced with unauthorized inquiries about classified markings. It acknowledged Voss's concerns while directing her toward official channels that could either authenticate Helena's legitimate status or ensure that sensitive information was protected according to established security protocols. But Voss had not achieved her position by accepting evasive answers from subordinates, particularly when those subordinates demonstrated the kind of unusual competence that suggested backgrounds more complex than official documentation indicated. "Sergeant Rivera, I'm going to ask you one more time to provide a direct answer to a direct question. What is that marking? Where did it come from? And why have you been concealing it beneath your hair?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Helena realized that Voss's persistence was about to force a decision that would determine the success or failure of her entire mission at Fort Blackstone. Continued evasion would likely prompt Voss to initiate formal investigations that could expose Project Lazarus operations, but premature revelation of classified information could compromise ongoing counterintelligence activities and potentially endanger other operatives conducting similar missions. "Ma'am," Helena said, her voice carrying subtle notes of authority that hadn't been present in any of her previous communications as Maya Rivera. "I strongly recommend that you contact the Defense Intelligence Agency before pursuing this matter further. There are protocols for handling situations involving personnel whose backgrounds may be more complex than routine military assignments would suggest." The change in Helena's tone and bearing was subtle but unmistakable. Voss had spent enough years in military service to recognize when someone was speaking from position of knowledge and authority that exceeded their apparent rank and position. Helena was no longer responding as a junior enlisted soldier facing disciplinary action from a superior officer. She was responding as someone who understood classified procedures and security protocols from perspective of direct involvement rather than theoretical training. "Defense Intelligence Agency," Voss repeated slowly, her voice carrying growing comprehension of the implications. "Sergeant Rivera, are you telling me that you're not actually assigned to my battalion for routine communications duties?" Helena maintained her position of parade rest, but something had shifted in her posture that suggested coiled capability rather than submissive compliance. "Ma'am, I'm telling you that there are aspects of military operations at Fort Blackstone that extend beyond the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion's official mission parameters. I'm recommending that you contact appropriate authorities before making assumptions about personnel assignments that may involve classified operations." Voss stared at the marking on Helena's neck with growing realization that she had stumbled into something far more complex and dangerous than simple personnel management. The geometric precision of the exposed pattern clearly represented technological sophistication that went beyond anything available through conventional military channels. More significantly, Helena's responses suggested knowledge of procedures and authorities that indicated involvement in operations that extended far above Voss's security clearance level. "This marking," Voss said, gesturing toward Helena's exposed neck, "this isn't some kind of personal tattoo or medical condition. This is some kind of identification system, isn't it? Some kind of way to authenticate personnel who are conducting operations that aren't documented in normal military records." Helena's silence was confirmation enough. Voss had identified the essential truth about the marking's purpose, though she clearly didn't understand the scope or sensitivity of the operations that such identification systems were designed to protect. The moment had arrived when further concealment would be impossible, and Helena would have to choose between compromising her mission or trusting that Voss possessed sufficient discretion to handle classified information appropriately. "Captain Voss," Helena said, her voice now carrying unmistakable authority, "I need you to step away from me and contact the Defense Intelligence Agency immediately. Tell them that Project Lazarus operative authentication is required at Fort Blackstone. Give them your security clearance information and wait for instructions." The transformation was complete. Helena was no longer Sergeant First Class Maya Rivera, communications specialist. She was Major Helena Vasquez, Project Lazarus operative, and the carefully maintained balance between operational security and mission effectiveness had just collapsed in ways that would reshape everything about Fort Blackstone's understanding of its own vulnerabilities. The silence that followed Helena's revelation stretched through Captain Voss's office like the moment after an explosion when sound itself seemed stunned into absence. Voss stared at the woman who had been Sergeant First Class Maya Rivera for 28 months, processing the implications of what she had just heard while her mind struggled to reconcile the quiet communications technician she thought she knew with someone who spoke of Project Lazarus operatives and Defense Intelligence Agency authentication protocols as if they were routine military procedures. Helena remained at parade rest, but every aspect of her bearing had undergone subtle transformation that made her previous 28 months of careful anonymity seem almost impossible to believe. The way she held her shoulders suggested physical conditioning that went far beyond standard military fitness requirements. Her breathing remained controlled in patterns that indicated training in stress management techniques that weren't covered in conventional Army instruction. Most significantly, her eyes now showed the kind of analytical awareness that came from constant threat assessment and tactical evaluation of surrounding environments. Project Lazarus, Voss repeated slowly, her voice carrying the careful tone that military officers used when they suspected they were dealing with classified information that exceeded their security clearance levels. I've never heard of any Project Lazarus in official briefings or command communications. Elena's expression remained neutral, but something in her posture suggested that Voss's ignorance of Project Lazarus was expected and entirely appropriate. Ma'am, Project Lazarus operates under security classifications that are compartmented above most conventional military operations. The fact that you haven't received briefings about it confirms that security protocols are functioning as designed. Voss moved behind her desk, instinctively seeking the psychological authority that furniture positioning could provide, but Elena's revelation had fundamentally altered the power dynamics in the room. Voss was no longer dealing with a subordinate soldier who could be intimidated through rank and disciplinary threats. She was confronting someone whose actual authority and mission parameters remained completely unknown but clearly extended far beyond anything that Voss had been trained to handle. "Captain," Elena continued, her voice carrying patient professionalism, "I need you to understand that contacting the Defense Intelligence Agency isn't a suggestion. It's a security requirement that's been triggered by exposure of classified authentication materials. The marking you've uncovered identifies me as an operative conducting counterintelligence operations under authority that comes directly from the National Security Council." The implications crashed over Voss like an avalanche of administrative and legal consequences that could destroy her career and potentially result in criminal prosecution. If Elena was telling the truth, then Voss had just physically assaulted a federal agent conducting classified operations. More critically, she had compromised operational security through unauthorized exposure of classified identification systems that were designed to remain concealed under all circumstances except controlled authentication procedures. "If what you're saying is accurate," Voss said carefully, "then I need to understand why you've been operating at my installation without my knowledge or authorization. I'm the commanding officer of the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion. No counterintelligence operations should be conducted within my area of responsibility without my clearance and oversight." Elena's slight smile carried no warmth, only the professional courtesy that intelligence operatives extended to conventional military personnel who didn't understand the realities of modern classified operations. "Ma'am, with respect, your security clearance doesn't extend to oversight of Project Lazarus activities. Your need-to-know authorization doesn't include information about counterintelligence operations that may be targeting personnel within your own command structure." The words hit Voss with the force of a physical blow as she began to understand the scope of what Elena was revealing. If Project Lazarus operatives were conducting counterintelligence operations at Fort Blackstone, it meant that someone with access to the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion's most sensitive activities was suspected of being an enemy agent. Elena hadn't been assigned to Fort Blackstone to provide routine technical support. She had been inserted to hunt for traitors operating within one of the Army's most classified intelligence units. "Are you telling me," Voss asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "that someone in my battalion is suspected of espionage?" Elena's silence was confirmation enough. The careful non-response that intelligence operatives used when direct answers would compromise ongoing investigations, while indirect communication could convey essential information to personnel who needed to understand the scope of security concerns. Voss sank into her chair as the full implications became clear. For 28 months, she had been commanding a unit that contained at least one suspected enemy operative, someone with access to signals intelligence capabilities that could compromise American military operations worldwide. Elena had been conducting surveillance of Voss's own personnel, identifying behavioral patterns and security vulnerabilities that could indicate foreign infiltration at the highest levels of classified military operations. "How long have you known?" Voss asked. "How long have you suspected that my battalion has been compromised?" Elena maintained her position, but her expression softened slightly as she recognized that Voss was beginning to understand the reality of modern counterintelligence operations. "Ma'am, I can't discuss specific operational details without appropriate authorization. What I can tell you is that Project Lazarus investigations are initiated only when intelligence analysis indicates high probability of enemy infiltration in critical facilities. The phone on Voss's desk suddenly seemed like the most important object in the room. Helena had given her specific instructions for contacting the Defense Intelligence Agency, but Voss realized that making that call would irrevocably change her understanding of her own command responsibilities and potentially expose her to oversight by intelligence agencies whose operations she had never been trained to comprehend. If I make this call, Voss said, if I contact the Defense Intelligence Agency and confirm your authentication, what happens to my command? What happens to the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion? Helena's response was immediate and definitive. Ma'am, that depends entirely on what my investigation has uncovered during 28 months of operational surveillance. If enemy operatives have been identified within your battalion, there will be arrests, court-martial proceedings, and comprehensive security reviews that could affect every person assigned to Fort Blackstone. Voss stared at the classified marking on Helena's neck, realizing that the geometric pattern represented not just identification of a federal agent, but evidence of a counterintelligence operation that could expose treachery at the highest levels of American military intelligence. The punishment she had intended to inflict through hair-cutting had instead revealed secrets that threatened to unravel everything she thought she understood about her own battalion's security and loyalty. And if I don't make the call? Voss asked, though she already understood that refusal to follow Helena's instructions would constitute obstruction of a classified federal investigation. Helena's expression hardened with the kind of authority that came from representing agencies whose power extended far beyond conventional military command structures. Ma'am, exposure of Project Lazarus authentication materials automatically triggers security protocols that don't require your cooperation. The Defense Intelligence Agency has already been notified through electronic monitoring systems that detected the electromagnetic signature of my marking when it was exposed to artificial light. As if summoned by Helena's words, the secure telephone on Voss's desk began ringing with the distinctive tone that indicated priority communications requiring immediate command attention. The sound echoed through the small office like an electronic death knell for 28 months of carefully maintained operational security and the beginning of revelations that would reshape Fort Blackstone's understanding of its own vulnerabilities. Helena turned to face Captain Voss directly for the first time since the haircutting had begun, and Voss saw in her eyes the cold competence of someone whose mission was about to transition from covert surveillance to active counterintelligence operations that would expose enemy agents who had spent years building false identities within America's most sensitive military installations. Captain Voss reached for the secure telephone with hands that trembled slightly as the implications of Helena's revelation continued to cascade through her understanding of military hierarchy, classified operations, and her own position within a counterintelligence investigation that had been unfolding under her command for over 2 years. The distinctive ring tone indicated priority communications that couldn't be ignored or delayed, the kind of call that came from agencies whose authority superseded normal military command structures. Captain Helena Voss, Commanding Officer, 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion, she said into the handset, her voice carefully controlled despite the psychological shock of discovering that her quiet communications technician was actually a federal agent conducting surveillance operations within her own unit. The voice that responded was crisp, professional, and carried the kind of authority that came from dealing with classified matters so sensitive that most military personnel weren't even allowed to know they existed. Captain Voss, this is Director Sarah Chun, Defense Intelligence Agency, Counterintelligence Operations Division. We have a situation that requires immediate coordination and your complete cooperation. Helena remained at attention, but Voss noticed that her posture had shifted into something that suggested readiness for immediate action rather than submission to military discipline. The transformation from Sergeant Rivera to whatever Helena actually represented was continuing to unfold, revealing capabilities and preparation that suggested training far beyond anything available through conventional military channels. Director Chun, Voss replied, I believe I have one of your operatives in my office, someone who identifies herself as being associated with Project Lazarus and who claims to have been conducting counterintelligence operations at Fort Blackstone. Captain, the operative you're referring to is Major Elena Vasquez, United States Army Special Operations Command, currently assigned to classified counterintelligence duties under my operational authority. The authentication marking that you've apparently exposed identifies her as a legitimate federal agent conducting authorized surveillance operations. The confirmation hit Voss like artillery fire. Helena wasn't just a Defense Intelligence Agency operative. She was a field-grade officer whose actual rank exceeded Voss's own position within the military hierarchy. For 28 months, Voss had been giving orders to someone whose real authority came directly from agencies that operated at the highest levels of national security decision-making. Director Chun, Voss said carefully, I need to understand the scope of Major Vasquez's mission at my installation. If counterintelligence operations have been conducted within my battalion without my knowledge, I have security responsibilities that may have been compromised. Helena stepped forward, no longer maintaining the submissive posture of a soldier receiving disciplinary action, and extended her hand toward the telephone. Ma'am, may I speak with Director Chin directly? There are operational updates that need immediate communication. Voss handed over the phone, recognizing that she was no longer the senior authority in her own office. Helena's demeanor had completed its transformation from careful anonymity to professional competence that suggested years of training in operations that Voss had never been cleared to understand. Director Chun, this is Major Vasquez, Helena said into the handset, her voice carrying reports precision that made her 28 months as Sergeant Rivera seem almost impossible to believe. Authentication has been compromised due to unauthorized disciplinary action by local command. Project Lazarus operational security has been breached, and I'm requesting immediate transition to active phase protocols. Voss could hear the distant sound of Director Chen's response, but couldn't make out specific words. Helena listened with the focused attention of someone receiving mission-critical instructions, occasionally nodding or making brief acknowledgments that indicated complex coordination between multiple agencies and operational parameters. Understood, Helena said finally, initiating suspect detention protocols and requesting immediate backup from regional counterintelligence teams. Estimated time to complete identification and arrest operations is 6 hours. Helena handed the telephone back to Voss, who accepted it with growing realization that her installation was about to become the center of a counterintelligence operation that would expose enemy agents operating within one of America's most sensitive military facilities. Captain Voss, Director Chen's voice continued through the handset, Major Vasquez has been conducting surveillance operations that have identified at least 3 personnel within your battalion who demonstrate behavioral patterns consistent with foreign intelligence infiltration. We're implementing immediate security protocols to prevent these suspects from communicating with external handlers or destroying evidence of their espionage activities. The scope of the operation was staggering. 3 suspected enemy agents within a single intelligence battalion meant that classified information about American signals intelligence capabilities had potentially been compromised for years. Worse, these operatives might have been positioned to sabotage critical systems during times of international crisis, leaving American military forces blind and deaf when they most needed sophisticated intelligence support. What do you need from me? Voss asked, though she suspected that her role in the coming operation would be limited to providing administrative support for investigations conducted by agencies whose capabilities far exceeded anything available through conventional military channels. Immediate lockdown of all personnel within the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion, Director Chun replied. No one leaves the installation, no one makes external communications, and no one accesses classified systems without direct authorization from Major Vasquez or her backup team. We're treating this as a potential espionage crisis that could affect national security. Helena was already moving toward Voss's computer terminal, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with the kind of technical fluency that had seemed remarkable when she was Sergeant Rivera but now appeared as just one aspect of capabilities that extended far beyond routine network maintenance. Within moments, she had accessed security systems that Voss didn't know existed, implementing lockdown protocols that would isolate Fort Blackstone from all external communications while internal security systems began tracking the movements and activities of every person on the installation. Captain, Helena said without looking up from her work, I need you to understand that the next 6 hours will determine whether 28 months of investigation results in successful identification and arrest of enemy operatives, or whether those operatives escape with classified information that could compromise American intelligence operations worldwide. Through the office windows, Voss could see that Fort Blackstone's routine morning activities were beginning to change. Military police vehicles were moving with unusual urgency, security checkpoints were being reinforced with additional personnel, and communications antennas were being adjusted in patterns that suggested preparation for operations that went far beyond normal intelligence gathering. The three suspects that Major Vasquez has identified, Director Chun continued through the telephone, include Technical Sergeant Marcus Webb, who has demonstrated technical capabilities that exceed his official training background, Staff Sergeant Jennifer Park, who has shown unusual interest in operations outside her assigned duties, and Master Sergeant Robert Chen, who has family connections to individuals with known ties to foreign intelligence services. Voss felt a chill of recognition as she realized that these were personnel she had worked with daily for months or years, soldiers whose competence and reliability she had never questioned. The possibility that they had been conducting espionage operations while serving in positions of trust within her battalion represented a fundamental failure of security that could affect her career and potentially result in criminal prosecution for negligence in protecting classified information. Elena completed her work at the computer terminal and turned to face both Voss and the telephone that connected them to Director Chun. "Lockdown is complete," she announced. "All external communications have been severed. Internal monitoring systems are active, and suspect tracking protocols are operational. We're ready to begin arrest operations." The transformation of Fort Blackstone from routine intelligence facility to active counterintelligence operation had taken less than 15 minutes, accomplished through capabilities that Elena had concealed beneath her carefully maintained identity as an unremarkable communications technician. The woman whose hair Voss had cut as punishment had revealed herself as someone whose true mission involved protecting American military secrets from enemies who had spent years positioning themselves to steal or destroy those secrets. The secure telephone crackled with Director Chen's final instructions. "Captain Voss, for the next 6 hours, Major Vasquez has operational command of all security activities at Fort Blackstone. Your cooperation with her directives is essential for national security." As Voss acknowledged the order and ended the call, she realized that her attempt to assert military discipline through haircutting had triggered the exposure of the most significant espionage investigation in Fort Blackstone's history. The first arrest began at 0947 hours when Major Elena Vasquez, accompanied by a tactical team that had materialized at Fort Blackstone with the speed and efficiency of a precision military operation, approached Technical Sergeant Marcus Webb's workstation in the sensitive compartmented information facility's main computer lab. Webb was conducting what appeared to be routine system maintenance on classified communication equipment. His concentration focused on diagnostic displays that showed the normal flow of encrypted data streams that connected Fort Blackstone to intelligence operations worldwide. Elena observed Webb through the reinforced glass partition that separated the main lab from the security corridor, studying behavioral patterns that she had been documenting for 28 months while maintaining her cover as Sergeant Rivera. Webb's technical competence had always exceeded what his official training record should have provided, and his work habits included subtle anomalies that suggested familiarity with classified protocols that weren't covered in conventional military instruction programs. "Target exhibits normal work patterns," Elena reported through her tactical communication headset to the arrest coordination team positioned throughout the facility. "No indication of awareness regarding security compromise. Proceeding with initial approach." The tactical team consisted of Defense Intelligence Agency operatives whose presence at Fort Blackstone had been coordinated through channels so classified that even acknowledging their existence required authorization from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They moved through the facility with the professional efficiency of personnel trained in conducting arrests within sensitive military installations, understanding that any mistakes could compromise ongoing operations or alert other enemy operatives to the investigation scope. Elena entered the computer lab with the same measured pace that had characterized her movements as Sergeant Rivera, but Webb's reaction to her appearance provided immediate confirmation of the surveillance conclusions she had developed over months of careful observation. Instead of the casual recognition that characterized normal workplace interaction, Webb's eyes showed sharp analytical assessment that suggested training in detecting counterintelligence operations. "Morning, Rivera," Webb said, his voice carrying forced casualness that didn't quite conceal underlying tension. "Heard there was some excitement in the command section this morning. Something about security protocols and emergency communications." Elena's training in psychological assessment recognized Webb's fishing for information as behavior consistent with enemy operative protocols for gathering intelligence about security compromises. A legitimate soldier would express curiosity about unusual activities but wouldn't probe for specific details about security procedures or command communications. "Technical Sergeant Webb," Elena said, her voice now carrying the authority of her actual rank and mission. "I need you to step away from your workstation and place your hands on the desk where I can see them." The transformation in Elena's bearing was immediately apparent to Webb, whose facial expression shifted from forced casualness to sharp alertness that confirmed every suspicion that 28 months of surveillance had developed. Instead of confusion or compliance that would characterize a legitimate soldier receiving unexpected orders, Webb's reaction showed the controlled assessment of someone evaluating tactical options and escape routes. "I'm sorry, Rivera," Webb said, slowly moving his hands toward his keyboard rather than the desk surface that Elena had specified. "But I don't understand what you're asking me to do. Is there some kind of security drill happening that I wasn't briefed about?" Elena recognized the response as classic enemy operative behavior, verbal compliance combined with physical actions designed to access communication equipment that could alert external handlers or initiate emergency protocols for destroying compromising evidence. Webb's hands were moving toward a secure terminal that could access communication channels extending beyond Fort Blackstone's internal network. "Technical Sergeant Marcus Webb," Elena announced, her voice carrying clear authority. "You are under arrest for suspected espionage activities conducted against the United States military. Remove your hands from the keyboard and assume the position I previously specified." The tactical team moved into the computer lab with synchronized precision as Webb's response confirmed his training in resistance to counterintelligence operations. Instead of compliance or confused protest that would characterize an innocent soldier, Webb attempted to activate emergency protocols on his workstation while simultaneously reaching toward equipment that Elena's surveillance had identified as potential communication devices hidden within routine technical gear. Elena drew her sidearm with fluid motion that demonstrated training far beyond standard military instruction as Webb's behavior escalated into active resistance. "Hands visible now," she commanded, while tactical team members secured the computer lab's exits and began isolating Webb's workstation from all network connections. Webb's attempt to access emergency communication protocols was interrupted by tactical team intervention, but his behavior during those crucial seconds provided definitive confirmation of Elena's intelligence assessment. His actions demonstrated familiarity with classified systems that exceeded his official clearance levels, knowledge of security procedures that weren't documented in his training records, and most critically, resistance patterns consistent with professional intelligence operative training. "Marcus Webb," Elena continued as tactical team members secured his person and began disconnecting his access to classified systems. "You have the right to remain silent, but I'm advising you that cooperation with this investigation may be taken into consideration during prosecution for espionage activities that carry penalties including life imprisonment or death." The arrest of Webb triggered immediate security protocols throughout Fort Blackstone as Elena's investigation transitioned from passive surveillance to active counterintelligence operations. Within minutes, Staff Sergeant Jennifer Park and Master Sergeant Robert Chun would face similar arrest procedures, each conducted with precision designed to prevent communication between suspected operatives and minimize opportunities for destroying evidence or alerting external handlers. Elena moved to Webb's workstation as tactical team members completed his detention, her fingers dancing across keyboards with the technical expertise that had enabled her to maintain surveillance of classified systems while appearing to conduct routine maintenance duties. The computer displayed evidence of activities that confirmed months of intelligence analysis, unauthorized access to communication protocols, suspicious file transfers that coincided with known foreign intelligence collection requirements, and most damning, encrypted data packets that showed patterns consistent with espionage reporting formats. Subject workstation shows evidence of unauthorized intelligence collection, Elena reported through her tactical communication system. Data analysis indicates systematic compromise of classified information over extended period, requesting immediate forensic preservation of all electronic evidence. Captain Voss observed the arrest procedures through security monitors in the command center, watching personnel she had supervised and trusted for months being detained as suspected enemy agents. The scope of the security breach was staggering: 3 operatives with access to some of America's most sensitive intelligence capabilities, positioned to steal secrets or sabotage operations that protected national security interests worldwide. Helena's voice crackled through the command center's communication system as the first arrest was completed. Target Alpha is secure. Evidence collection in progress. Proceeding with Target Beta arrest procedures. Estimated completion time 45 minutes. The counterintelligence operation that had begun with Captain Voss's attempt to assert discipline through haircutting was revealing enemy infiltration that threatened the fundamental security of American military intelligence operations. Helena's carefully maintained cover identity had concealed capabilities that were now exposing treachery at the highest levels of classified military activity. As tactical team members escorted Webb toward detention facilities specifically designed for holding personnel suspected of espionage activities, Helena reflected on 28 months of patient investigation that had finally reached its critical phase. The marking that Voss had exposed through punitive haircutting was proving to authenticate an operation that would protect American secrets from enemies who had spent years positioning themselves to steal or destroy those secrets. The hunt for enemy operatives within Fort Blackstone was entering its most dangerous phase, where captured spies would attempt to destroy evidence, contact handlers, or activate sleeper agents whose existence Helena had not yet discovered. Within 3 hours of Technical Sergeant Webb's arrest, the counterintelligence operation at Fort Blackstone had expanded into the most comprehensive espionage investigation in the installation's operational history. Major Helena Vasquez coordinated simultaneous arrest and evidence collection activities from the secure command center, her tactical communications headset connecting her to Defense Intelligence Agency teams conducting operations throughout the facility with precision that demonstrated months of preparation and planning. The arrest of Staff Sergeant Jennifer Park had proceeded according to Helena's operational timeline, but Park's response to detention had revealed training in resistance techniques that confirmed her status as a professional intelligence operative rather than a compromised American soldier. During the 37 minutes between her apprehension and secure interrogation, Park had attempted to activate 3 different emergency communication protocols, accessed classified computer systems in patterns consistent with evidence destruction procedures, and demonstrated knowledge of counterintelligence detection methods that exceeded anything available through conventional military training. Target Beta secured with significant resistance. Helena reported to Director Chun through encrypted communication channels that bypassed Fort Blackstone's normal networks. Subject demonstrated advanced tradecraft consistent with foreign intelligence operative training. Evidence suggests systematic compromise of classified communication protocols over minimum 18-month period. Master Sergeant Robert Chen's arrest had presented the most complex operational challenges, primarily because his position within the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion provided access to intelligence systems whose compromise could affect American military operations worldwide. Chun possessed security clearances that enabled him to monitor satellite communications intercepted from foreign military installations, analyze encrypted diplomatic communications between hostile governments, and coordinate intelligence sharing agreements with allied nations whose cooperation was essential for global security operations. Helena's surveillance of Chun during 28 months of covert investigation had documented behavioral patterns that suggested deep cover infiltration rather than recent recruitment by foreign intelligence services. Chen's technical capabilities, family background, and social connections indicated systematic preparation for long-term espionage operations that might have begun years before his assignment to Fort Blackstone. The interrogation facilities established within Fort Blackstone's most secure underground areas had been designed specifically for handling suspected espionage cases involving personnel with access to classified information so sensitive that standard military detention procedures were insufficient to prevent compromise of national security secrets. Each suspect was held in isolation conditions that prevented communication with external contacts, while sophisticated electronic monitoring systems tracked every aspect of their behavior and communications. Helena moved between interrogation cells with the professional efficiency of someone trained in extracting intelligence from captured enemy operatives, while maintaining legal protocols that would ensure any evidence collected could be used in court-martial proceedings or federal criminal prosecutions. Her 28 months of surveillance had provided detailed psychological profiles of each suspect that enabled targeted questioning techniques designed to exploit individual vulnerabilities and behavioral patterns. Technical Sergeant Webb's interrogation revealed the scope of foreign intelligence operations that had been conducted within Fort Blackstone's classified facilities for over 2 years. Webb admitted to systematic collection of classified information about American satellite surveillance capabilities, encryption protocols used to protect diplomatic communications, and operational procedures for signals intelligence collection that targeted foreign military installations. His handlers, identified through communication analysis as Russian Foreign Intelligence Service operatives, had provided detailed requirements for intelligence collection that suggested preparation for military operations that could neutralize American intelligence advantages during international conflicts. Staff Sergeant Park's resistance to interrogation initially appeared more sophisticated, but Helena's psychological assessment techniques eventually revealed information about Chinese Ministry of State security operations designed to compromise American cyber warfare capabilities. Park had been inserted into the 23rd Intelligence Support Battalion specifically to identify vulnerabilities in classified computer networks that protected American military communications from foreign electronic attack. Her intelligence reports had enabled foreign technical specialists to develop countermeasures that could potentially disable American military command and control systems during times of crisis. Master Sergeant Chen's confession provided the most comprehensive picture of enemy infiltration operations conducted against American military intelligence installations. Chen revealed systematic recruitment of military personnel with access to classified information, training programs conducted in facilities that didn't appear on any official organizational charts, and coordination between multiple foreign intelligence services that had combined resources to penetrate American national security operations. Captain Voss observed the interrogation proceedings through secure video feeds that displayed real-time analysis of each suspect's responses, psychological assessment data, and intelligence value evaluation conducted by specialized personnel whose expertise in counterintelligence operations exceeded anything available through conventional military channels. The scope of enemy infiltration within her battalion represented a fundamental security failure that could affect her career and potentially result in criminal prosecution for negligence in protecting classified information. 3 confirmed enemy operatives with systematic access to classified intelligence operations over minimum 2-year period. Helena reported to Director Chun during secure communication that summarized the investigation's preliminary findings. Evidence indicates coordination between Russian and Chinese intelligence services targeting American signals intelligence capabilities, satellite surveillance operations, and cyber warfare defensive systems. The intelligence compromise discovered at Fort Blackstone extended far beyond individual espionage cases to reveal systematic enemy operations designed to neutralize American military advantages through targeted collection of classified technical information. Helena's investigation had identified communication networks that connected the Fort Blackstone operatives to handlers in multiple foreign countries, financial support systems that had enabled years of covert operations, and most critically, intelligence requirements that suggested preparation for military conflicts where American forces would face enemies who understood American capabilities in unprecedented detail. Defense Intelligence Agency analysis teams working in secure facilities beneath Fort Blackstone had begun comprehensive assessment of intelligence damage that could affect American military operations worldwide. Every classified document accessed by the 3 suspects required individual evaluation to determine what information had been compromised, which ongoing operations might be affected, and what countermeasures could minimize the strategic impact of years of systematic espionage. Helena's role in the investigation transitioned from covert surveillance to active coordination of damage assessment activities that would determine the scope of intelligence compromise and identify additional security vulnerabilities that enemy operatives might have exploited. Her 28 months of careful observation had provided baseline data that enabled investigators to distinguish between legitimate operational activities and suspicious behavior patterns that might indicate additional enemy infiltration. The success of Operation Lazarus at Fort Blackstone would serve as a model for counterintelligence operations at military installations worldwide, but the intelligence damage revealed through Helena's investigation demonstrated that American military security faced threats far more sophisticated and pervasive than conventional security procedures had been designed to address. As Helena prepared comprehensive reports that would influence American counterintelligence policy for decades, she reflected on the irony that Captain Voss's attempt to assert military discipline through haircutting had ultimately exposed enemy operations that threatened the fundamental security of American military intelligence capabilities worldwide. 18 months after the counterintelligence operation that would forever be classified in Defense Intelligence Agency archives as the Fort Blackstone revelation, Major Helena Voss stood before a closed session of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence in a hearing room so secure that its location wasn't acknowledged in any congressional directory. The transformation in both her appearance and her role within the intelligence community was remarkable, representing the evolution from deep-cover operative to senior architect of American counterintelligence strategy. Helena's hair had grown back to regulation length and was styled with professional precision that reflected her new position as Director of Counterintelligence Operations for the Defense Intelligence Agency's Special Access Programs Division. But more significant than any physical change was her emergence from the shadows of covert operations into a leadership role that would influence American national security policy for decades to come. The Fort Blackstone investigation had expanded far beyond the arrest of 3 enemy operatives to reveal systematic foreign infiltration of American military intelligence installations worldwide. Helena's techniques for identifying embedded enemy agents had been refined and standardized into training programs that were being implemented at 47 military facilities across 6 continents, creating a comprehensive defensive network against espionage operations that threatened the fundamental security of American military capabilities. Committee members, Helena began, her voice carrying the confident authority of someone whose expertise had been validated through operational success that protected national security interests. 18 months ago, I was an unknown major conducting classified surveillance operations at a single Army intelligence facility. Today, I'm briefing you on counterintelligence programs that have fundamentally altered how the United States military protects its most sensitive operations from enemy infiltration. Representative Michael Harrison, the committee chairman, leaned forward with the expression of someone who had spent months reviewing classified briefings that challenged conventional understanding of espionage threats facing American military installations. Major Voss, your written testimony indicates that the techniques you developed at Fort Blackstone have been successfully applied to identify enemy operatives at military facilities worldwide. Can you provide this committee with assessment of the scope of foreign infiltration that these investigations have uncovered? Helena activated a secure tablet that projected classified displays onto screens visible only to committee members with appropriate clearances, revealing data that documented the most comprehensive counterintelligence success in recent American military history. Sir, during the past 18 months, Project Lazarus operations have identified and arrested 63 confirmed foreign intelligence operatives conducting espionage activities within American military installations. These arrests have exposed intelligence collection networks operated by 7 different foreign intelligence services targeting American military capabilities, ranging from satellite surveillance to cyber warfare defensive systems. The data displayed was staggering in its implications. Enemy operatives had been discovered at installations responsible for monitoring foreign military communications, developing advanced weapon systems, and coordinating intelligence sharing agreements with allied nations whose cooperation was essential for global security operations. The systematic nature of foreign infiltration suggested coordination between multiple hostile intelligence services that had combined resources to penetrate American national security operations at unprecedented levels. Representative Sarah Chun, whose security clearance provided access to the most sensitive intelligence assessments, studied the classified displays with evident concern. Major Voss, these numbers suggest that foreign intelligence services have been conducting systematic penetration of our military installations for years. How did conventional security procedures fail to detect this level of infiltration? Helena's response outlined fundamental weaknesses in American counterintelligence procedures that had enabled enemy operatives to establish deep-cover identities within military installations while avoiding detection through traditional security screening. Ma'am, conventional security procedures were designed to detect foreign agents operating from external positions rather than embedded operatives who had spent years establishing authentic American identities. The enemy operatives we've identified possessed genuine military service records, legitimate security clearances, and behavioral patterns so carefully constructed that they passed polygraph examinations and psychological evaluations. The techniques that Helena had developed during her 28 months at Fort Blackstone involved psychological assessment methods that could identify subtle inconsistencies in behavior patterns that distinguished authentic military personnel from sophisticated impersonators. These techniques required training in advanced behavioral analysis, understanding of foreign intelligence operational procedures, and most critically, the ability to conduct long-term surveillance while maintaining deep cover identities that could fool even experienced counterintelligence professionals. The fundamental innovation of Project Lazarus, Helena continued, involves using our own deep cover operatives to hunt enemy deep cover operatives. Conventional counterintelligence relies on external observation and analysis, but enemy operatives trained in modern tradecraft can defeat those methods through careful behavioral conditioning and identity construction. Representative Harrison consulted his classified briefing materials before asking the question that addressed the core lesson of the Fort Blackstone operation. Major Vasquez, your experience at Fort Blackstone involved exposure of your classified authentication through unauthorized disciplinary action by a commanding officer. What procedures have been implemented to prevent similar compromises of ongoing counterintelligence operations? Helena's slight smile reflected professional satisfaction in addressing security vulnerabilities that had been identified through operational experience. Sir, we've implemented comprehensive training programs for senior military officers that help them recognize when they might be dealing with personnel conducting classified operations beyond conventional command authority. The goal is to prevent future incidents where well-intentioned disciplinary actions could compromise sensitive investigations. The training programs that emerged from Helena's experience included instruction in recognizing behavioral patterns that might indicate deep cover operations, protocols for confirming personnel identities through appropriate security channels, and most importantly, understanding that modern military installations might host operations so classified that even senior commanders weren't authorized to receive briefings about their existence. Additionally, Helena continued, we've developed new authentication systems that provide classified identification without requiring physical markings that could be accidentally exposed. The technology involves biometric authentication that can be verified through secure communication channels without revealing classified information to unauthorized personnel. Representative Chun leaned back in her chair as she processed the implications of what Helena was describing. Major Vasquez, you're essentially telling this committee that the nature of modern espionage requires American military installations to operate with multiple levels of classified activity that even commanding officers might not be authorized to understand. Helena's response crystallized the fundamental transformation in American counterintelligence strategy that had emerged from the Fort Blackstone investigation. Ma'am, that's exactly what I'm telling you. In modern warfare, the most dangerous enemies are the ones operating inside our own facilities, and defeating them requires capabilities so sensitive that acknowledging their existence could compromise ongoing operations. The implications extended far beyond individual military installations to affect American foreign policy, alliance relationships, and strategic planning for potential conflicts where enemies would possess unprecedented knowledge of American military capabilities. Helena's investigation had revealed that traditional concepts of military security were inadequate for protecting against sophisticated enemy operations that combined advanced technology with years of careful preparation and identity construction. What happened at Fort Blackstone, Helena concluded, wasn't just about identifying 3 enemy operatives. It was about recognizing that American military security faces threats that require fundamentally new approaches to counterintelligence. The woman whose hair was cut as punishment became the architect of defensive systems that protect American military secrets from enemies who had spent decades positioning themselves to steal or destroy those secrets. As the committee session concluded and members began filing out through security checkpoints that scanned for recording devices and unauthorized materials, Helena reflected on the irony that Captain Voss's attempt to assert military discipline had triggered revelations that reshaped American understanding of espionage threats facing military installations worldwide. The punishment that was intended to humiliate a subordinate had instead exposed enemy operations that threatened the fundamental security of American military intelligence capabilities. The mission that had begun with concealing a classified marking beneath carefully arranged hair had evolved into comprehensive reform of American counterintelligence operations, ensuring that future enemies would face defensive capabilities designed by someone who understood exactly how sophisticated their infiltration techniques had become. In the end, the secret that emerged from a moment of petty military discipline had protected American military secrets from enemies whose capabilities exceeded anything that conventional security procedures had been designed to address. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.